Some foreign observers, the very few, said the countryside seemed a bit empty from what they could tell at this period, because so many people were forced to work at these kilns or go into the cities and work on projects, or go to sort of remote reservoir or dam building projects. And just the fields, just the country seemed a bit empty. A lot of the men, or as many men as they could get, were put on the sort of more industrial side of things, which meant some of the women that were left had to till the fields, which traditionally in China wasn't really a woman's job. And so a lot of them didn't necessarily know how to do it properly, you know. Like, I think, as far as I understand it, sowing a rice paddy, you need to know what you're doing. You don't just turn up there and just throw some seeds. It's like a thing. You have to know.
You have to pat the soil into shape and stuff to plant it in the first place.
I think you have to know down to like a few mil exactly how far to push the seed into the soil and stuff. You have to know to within, you know, a few centimetres or a few inches how far apart they have to be, and all that sort of thing. You can't just do it. Someone has to show you how to do it, and you have to need a bit of experience. And everyone that knew that was taken off the fields. Yeah, so again, it's compounding, thing after thing, compounding I
presume people were
impending doom.
Like people were treated like they could just do any kind of work as well.
Yeah,
you know what I mean, you're just a unit. You can just be sent to any project. So.
Yeah, it seems the party leadership didn't care about anything like that. Yeah, you were just soldiers, really, in a
war against nature,
in a work battle,
a war against reality.
Yeah. And as you can probably imagine, the situation on the ground was just chaotic. It wasn't managed properly. It couldn't have been. They're trying to force through these huge things with no money and not that many people, but just a big load of propaganda and a healthy swipe of violence. Yeah, and the state now, by 1958, is just sort of appropriated everything, more or less. Well, that was the idea anyway, on paper. Yeah, Dakota says, quote, "The stage was set for a war on the people, in which requisitions would plunge the country into the worst famine ever recorded in human history." That's the end of that quote, but a very senior party official right up there in sort of Mao's entourage said at this time, saying to other party officials in a meeting, quote, "You need to fight against the peasants. There is something ideologically wrong with you if you were afraid of coercion." End quote. Which is just what a cunt would say, I'm afraid. That's just, there's no other way. That's someone who probably needs to be put down.
It reminds me of that Khmer Rouge slogan.
What one?
Is it, to save you is of no benefit, to destroy you is of no cost? I think that's it.
That is like something out of 1984, isn't it? It's like...
What's worse?
It's like a novelist has sat there and tried to come up with something...
wantonly evil.
And by 1958, I mean, the famine had really kicked in. There's more than warning signs, really. There's just piles of bodies mounting up in some rural areas. You know, people walking around with famine edema, you know, the distended bellies and stuff. People selling their children. Apparently, selling children was a thing, because you might have quite a few children. I mean, the nightmare idea of having to decide to stop feeding one or two of your children so that the others might still have some food, or just selling them. I mean, there's individual stories of kids being sold for next to nothing.
And people eating corpses as well, right?
There is some... Oh, yeah, I've heard some examples of that, but... well, actually, yeah, there are. Yeah, it did get that bad. When Mao is told of some bodies piling up in certain places, he says it's a valuable lesson, as though he's going to do anything about it. He doesn't. Policies aren't reversed for a couple of years yet. But he just brushes it off as that. Oh, well, that's a valuable lesson, that we shouldn't let that happen again. But doesn't do anything about it. Well, in fact, plunges them further into it. Yeah, but he knew what was happening. Mao said that he wanted exports first, exports above all else. So whilst this famine is going on, China's still exporting millions of tons of grain and other foodstuffs to other countries. So China supplied East Germany with like nearly all its rice, for example, and it made sure it fulfilled all those.
And that really was fulfilled.
Yeah.
Because the East Germans would know if it wasn't.
Yeah. And, they were giving out loads of wheat in aid to places like Burma or things like this. They were still making sure that all their exports all their trade agreements were kept.
That's another parallel with the Soviets in the famines of 32, 33, I think. The Soviets were still exporting a lot of grain. Or there was millions dying.
It seems that the policy is that the exports come first, and then after that, the cities and industrial workers and the army come next. Because the goal here is steel above all else. So you've got to make sure the steel workers get fed if you can. And the army, of course.
And
the party, obviously. Obviously the party, obviously.
And Mao lavishly as well.
Well, Mao's fat. He gets fatter as the years go by. He's not missing meals.
He had whatever he wanted.
At one point, he said, he's going to stop eating. When it was very worst, he said he'd stop eating meat for a while in solidarity. But it wouldn't have been for long.
That's magnanimous.
So the peasants in rural areas are the sort of bottom of the list for making sure they've got enough fucking calories to stand up. And talking about that, actually, I'll just say something. I was reading a thing just the other day that was saying that a lot of the people that died of hunger, of just out and out hunger, probably wouldn't have died if they had 400 or 500 calories more, which is just a bowl of rice a day more.
Which you should be able to manage, really.
Because to actually die of starvation is such an extreme thing. You don't need that much food to not die. You'll get silly thin, but it will take a long time. Yeah, it's really horrible as well. It's not just like you're hungry for a while and then you die. Like the accounts from Leningrad, because that was sort of starved out or half starved out, wasn't it, in World War II? Some of the accounts are sort of the most detailed accounts I've heard of dying of starvation. It's horrible. Like, it's really painful, I think. Like, your stomach really hurts, and it's like maddening. Like, you'll do anything for a little bit of food. I've never really gone massively hungry, but have you ever been really thirsty? Have you ever been caught somewhere maybe for like half a day or something? You can't get a drink and you just feel so unbelievably thirsty that you get just a fraction of the feeling of how insane you might go if you were dying of thirst. Apparently hunger's just like the same thing, or maybe even worse, because it's sort of slower, so you've got more time to dwell on it. And you'll eat anything. Like, you'll eat sort of the bark off trees, you'll eat seeds, you'll eat things that are sort of poisonous.
All the grass has been pulled up already, obviously.
You'll eat sort of the wood glue. Take apart some furniture and eat the wood glue because there's a tiny amount of sort of organic material in there or something. People would eat in China, in the Great Leap Forward, would eat the grains straight off the plants in the fields, which you can't really do. You can't really digest that properly. Sometimes it's even can be a bit poisonous.
Yeah, that might even make you pass more out of your intestines as
well. Well, when it comes to people would eat mud, actual mud. There's even this type of mud in China that's got a nickname. I can't remember what it is, but it will kill you slightly slower than normal mud if you eat it. But there's this thing, apparently when you're really starving, dying of starving, hungry, you get this psychological thing where you just want to put something in your stomach. You need to put something in your stomach, or it will send you mad. Like, people will swallow rocks and stuff. And this certain type of mud, they say loads and loads and thousands of people would eat this mud, and eventually it constipates you up and you die. But also just dying of starvation in general, like, you will die in the end of something like a heart attack. Like, your body breaks and you have organ failure. Multiple organ failure is what you actually die of in the end if you're dying of hunger. It's terrible. It's like, it's one of the worst things ever, really. Like, it's so much worse than being hung or having your head chopped off or something. So much worse.
And it's so unjust as well.
Yeah.
Like, it didn't really need to happen,
But Mao and the party made sure that their foreign contracts were honoured, first and foremost. About this time in 1959, they go on something of a shopping spree, just buying up, mainly from the Soviets, almost entirely from the Soviets, just buying like whole turnkey projects, steel mills, cement kilns, glass factories, power stations, oil refineries, just buying them wholesale, cranes, lorries, generators, motors, pumps, compressors, harvesters, combines, tractors, machine tools. It goes on and on and on.
And their exports were helping fund that, I guess.
To some degree, yeah. And they were selling as a matter of pride to show that communism was so great. A lot of their exports, they were selling at less than cost price. So, for example, in Hong Kong, which was controlled by the British, where there's sort of open markets, they would make whatever it is, let's say raincoats or Wellington boots or something. The ones that the Chinese made, they would sell to Hong Kong or sell to the markets in Hong Kong cheaper than any capitalist country could ever produce them, at a massive loss, just to show that they could, or just to show off, really. But that was, again, a disastrous thing for their economy. Just a pride thing, just an ideological sort of pride thing.
Boasting about a system that in fact was absolutely terrible.
Yeah, well, it couldn't be more wasteful or inefficient, really. Well, it could be, but it's up there. It's pretty bad. The breakneck sort of speed and intensity of the Chinese push towards industrialisation and rural collectivisation was followed by a type of terror. Again, not like a Stalinist type terror, but I mean, when it becomes clear by sort of 1960, really, it was clear early in that, but when it becomes sort of, it gets to the point where no one can really deny that there's massive famines going on. Mao starts to blame everyone else around him, more or less. He doesn't ever take any real responsibility for it at all. He goes on the road and some of the others around him, in the sort of very top of the party, sort of go on the road to see things for themselves, claiming that until that point, they hadn't known what was going down. But we know from records that's not true, or can only partially be true. There's one point where Mao strangely calls himself a rightist. He says that it's like far left elements that have caused all the problems, and we should move slightly more to the right. I myself am a rightist. That's really an example of his mercurial nature. He's doesn't really want to move to the right or anything.
It's a manoeuvre.
And no one else could call themselves a rightist without getting denounced or anything like that. So, yeah, it's a manoeuvre, absolutely, yeah. It's just a gambit to sort of take a little bit of heat off himself. But he did say that, which is a funny thing to sort of see in the record. And yeah, he says that line that, you know, we may lose one finger out of 10, but we've still got 9.
And that is about the score, that is about the measure of it, right?
Yeah.
They did lose about one of their fingers.
Well, no, it's worse than that. I mean, Mao said, this is an actual quote from Mao, it is better that half the people should die so that the other half may eat their fill.
Christ.
Another one of his slogans from this period was, he who strikes first will prevail. I think there might be a corollary of he who doesn't strike first will fail or something like that. It's just like bullshit, you know. It's just a guy sitting by a swimming pool eating whatever he wants, just passing down orders and no one saying no to him, really. But they begin to, soon enough, but that's what really caused it in sort of 57, 58. And what they call the procurements, which is when the state goes out into rural areas and takes what they need for their purposes to feed the army and the cities. These procurements are what really causes the actual famine for tens of millions of people to die of hunger, because they just take it all, basically, more or less. I mean, not all, but in some places they might take it all. So,
and they're being given silly targets probably as well. And
yeah, of course, yeah. So it's in 1959 when it's really, well, it's a famine on top of a famine from the previous year, and it's chaos on the ground, basically, that the cadres or local party bosses are just more or less bewildered by the contradictory signals that are coming out of Beijing, and they're being told by their party overlords. They don't know what to do. They don't know whether to lie or to tell the truth or what. Yeah, it's a shit show is what it is. It sounds like.
And the whole country is kind of corrupted morally as well, right? Because
in a political sense.
Yeah. Corrupted by politics, because like
Dicotta calls it the death of truth at this point.
Yeah, I've heard people talking about it, saying just the lies of the Great Revolution, the Great Leap Forward, are just diabolical in themselves.
Well, it's in this time 59 that there's one of them times when I daydream if someone just pulled out a pistol and shot Mao in the throat right now, it would be it'd be better for the whole world, or for China anyway. They have a conference every year. They have like a party plenum where they all get together and talk about policy and sorts of things. And there's a really lovely location apparently up in the mountains called Lushan, where Chiang Kai-shek used to have a chateau and stuff. And the party quite often has their meetings up there. And there's a really important one this year. And it's where the first sort of dissent starts really coming to the fore. So Mao goes into this Lushan conference with sort of still more or less complete authority over the party. And he says he wants the party delegates to speak openly amongst themselves, break off into small groups and speak openly about all the policies and where we're going and where we're going to go forward in like the next 5-year plan and that sort of thing. But over the next sort of couple of weeks, they just start talking openly amongst themselves about realities. Because it's becoming clear. Like there'll be people walking around with famine edema even inside the Zhongonghai compound in Beijing, where the upper echelons live and work most of the time. So they absolutely know. And they go too far for Mao's liking. They're sort of openly talking about that it's like not the correct policy and stuff like that. They all try to be as obsequious and sycophantic as they possibly can, but a criticism's a criticism. If you're going to say it, you can dress it up so much, which they do. Mao is got a good ear for any criticism, if you like. He is kind of paranoid. He does nothing nothing passes him by,
But he was never thick.
No, not in those terms. No. One of the guys is really high up in the party. Super high up, sort of top 5 guys, starts speaking out. This old guy who sort of has always sort of been fairly open with Mao goes back to like the Long March. It's like one of the old guard. And he says that the idea of letting all the people smelt steel is absurd, which is quite strong criticism, really. But he says that. The same guy also said that the, quote, the shortcomings outweigh the achievements by a factor of 9 to 1, end quote. So turning Mao's 1 finger out of 10 thing on its head. And Mao doesn't forget that, that guy's card is marked. But he's not like Stalin. That guy just isn't strung up by piano wire within 20 minutes or anything. But, so it's sort of, I think of this Lushan conference as a little bit like, a really small intra-party 100 Flowers Bloom period where he sort of lets everyone say what they want, so that he can then later, it might be years later in the Cultural Revolution, but I remember you said I wasn't brilliant one time. It's one of those sort of situations. But yeah, it's basically openly talked about that there's a problem, that there even is a massive famine going on. A lot of the party would always talk, if they had to talk about that there were piles of bodies in villages, or that everyone was walking around half starved to death, or that millions of homes had been destroyed, they would talk about it as though it were an environmental disaster. They would talk about it as though it was some natural catastrophe. And it was only after this conference where they were sort of able to sort of start talking about it as though it was a man-made issue. But that gives you a feeling for how sort of strict dissent had become. And because, again, in the actual 100 Flowers Bloom period, Mao had, purged the party of dissenters. So no wonder it took a quite extreme, very extreme situation before they spoke out. And Mao sort of lets this go on for a couple of weeks, and then he eventually makes a speech, like a long rambling speech, basically saying, fuck you guys. Basically saying, he says something like, if I have to, I'll ask the army to follow me. And me alone, like against the party. And if the army doesn't follow me, I'll go into the countryside and raise a new Red Army. He's like that. That's when I think someone would have been nice to just pull out a 45 and just put a slug between his eyes. But no one did. Everyone was like, okay. And then he purges the party again of any of the bad elements, as far as he's concerned, bad elements, rightist counter-revolutionaries, and continues on.
Still not that often executing people.
Rarely, yeah, quite rarely. As a direct order from Mao, But his policies got people killed, like millions of people killed. But he personally ordering an execution of someone is quite rare.
Getting party rivals killed like that didn't happen
it's quite
much.
rare. Yeah.
Mostly just removed from posts, sometimes from the party.
Yeah, like so. One of the worst things he would do to you if you were in his inner entourage and you displeased him, he would just send you to go and work in a really rural area, tilling fields or digging pits or fixing tractors in the middle of nowhere indefinitely, probably on shitty rations.
But then maybe to be rehabilitated some years later.
Possibly,
That did happen.
It was like a re-education program that you may or may not finish.
That you may or may not survive.
Exactly. Well, that's what I mean. Yeah. Well, Deng Xiaoping who became leader after Mao, not directly after, but eventually became leader, had been sent away twice, I believe, by Mao for incorrect ideological thought. Yeah, one time he was sent just to some really rural area to fix tractors for a few years, and then he came back to Zhonghai and was back in the inner sanctum of power again. So, yeah, Mao rarely ordered people murdered. Not by this stage, anyway. Earlier in his career, back in the Civil War days and stuff, yeah. He would denounce someone knowing that it would lead to their killing. But, yeah. In July of 1959, Khrushchev criticises the Great Leap Forward openly and says, I don't think this is openly, but says to Mao finally, no, you're not going to get nukes. That's what Mao wanted more than anything else off of the Soviets, and they had sort of procrastinated and sort of strung him along a bit. But Khrushchev now says, no, you know what, no deal on that. Yeah, but Mao bites back against his critics in another speech. It's a line that is said before to other people, but it's a line where he says something along the lines of, if you attack me, if you don't attack me, I won't attack you. But if you attack me, like, by God, I'm going to attack you. Something along those lines. The translation's a bit different, but...
So he had to somewhat fight to keep control by sort of 59-60. Right?
Yeah.
But he still did have pretty loyal people surrounding him.
Yeah. Yeah, well, this is the juncture where if sort of 3 or 4 of the top boys directly under Mao had all gone against him, he would have been deposed, probably. Yeah, could have been deposed. Or at least his policies just put on the back burner and they decide among themselves what they want to do. But they didn't. They fell in line behind him. And
was there a mad cult of personality around Mao in the country as well?
Yes, not as mad as it became. The cult. If you're thinking of sort of the Cultural Revolution and the Red Guard and all that, it's not that.
Then there really was.
Yeah, okay. It's not that, but there is a cult of personality around him, but it's not. It hasn't gone to insane lengths yet. No, but yeah, he is the chairman. He's the one that led them to victory. Yeah, but yeah, like Lin Biao and Deng Xiaoping and Zhou Enlai. I mean, they're probably the big 3, or among the biggest boys, and they all fall in behind him, really. They're his cronies.
So they were important keeping the whole thing going.
Yeah, the next year or two becomes really, for Mao, a question in the party between a unity or a split, and he obviously wants it to be unified under him, and so he has sort of grilling sessions for all those people that criticised him at that Laoshan conference. He makes them write and rewrite apologies of why they were wrong and that sort of thing, and just clamps down on the party again.
Well, this is sort of 60 into 61.
59 into 60 sort of thing, yeah. And he denounces them as bourgeois Democrats. That's anyone that spoke out against him at that Laoshan conference. He calls them anti-party, anti-people, anti-socialist mistakes of a rightist, opportunist nature. So it's just all the words.
I suppose some people will judge that on balance, Mao did more good than harm.
Are you serious?